Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Curiosity Stream. So, to me, The Mandalorian Season 2 is attempting something pretty interesting. Season 1 of the show was fairly stripped down, or about as stripped down as a Star Wars space western could be. Sure, it had the recognizably Star Wars atmosphere, but it was also very self-contained. You could come into it barely caring about the larger universe it was set in and understand everything pretty easily. But Season 2 is taking some bigger swings. Now the shows are very, very different in just about every other way, but it almost reminds me of Arrow, with its fairly straightforward Season 1 giving way to an expansive DC universe. And I wouldn't be surprised to see this show launch a spinoff or 3 just like that one did. Now whether The Mandalorian makes that transition well or poorly is a completely different question, and if the Jedi is any indication, I don't think we have too much to worry about. It might be the most confident episode of The Mandalorian yet, and for me at least, visually it's the best the show has ever looked. So I guess that's where I'll start with this episode. The chapter begins with Ahsoka Tano's lightsabers cutting men down against a desolate and foggy background, and it looks great. The Mandalorian, and really this episode in particular, have been cited as having a really strong Kurosawa influence. And I get the comparison. This opening scene specifically reminded me a lot of one of the first scenes in Kurosawa's samurai classic, Throne of Blood from 1957. Just this moody fog rolling over a dead forest. Now, Star Wars has always been a mashup of Kurosawa and film westerns to some extent, but little Star Wars media has embraced that as much as this show does. Very, very literally too. And the result of that is a show that I think looks better than a lot of modern blockbusters. But the cinematography isn't all this episode has going for it. Let's talk a bit about Ahsoka herself. Rosario Dawson was always facing high expectations coming into the role, because the character became so beloved over the course of the Clone Wars. And I think she does a solid job here. Now, I've heard complaints that she doesn't sound enough like Ashley Eckstein, who voiced the character from her first appearance all the way to her cameo voice role in The Rise of Skywalker. That was always going to be a weird transition for fans of the character. And unlike Ewan McGregor, who modeled his vocal performance on Alec Guinness astoundingly well, Dawson decided not to go in that direction. People can criticize that, but I think it's a pretty valid choice. Dawson's take on the character is older and more mature. She kind of feels like the natural evolution of where we left that character after the Clone Wars. Now, Rebels kind of throws a wrench into that because it's set much closer to where we find her here, but her live action design is a lot closer to her Clone Wars look. But that doesn't bother me that much, and I'll admit that might just because I was never really a Rebels guy. Taken on its own though, Dawson turns in a good performance. It's a little strange that they never acknowledged that she left the Jedi Order, but in a post-Jedi Council world, I guess she's like the closest thing to a Jedi that you're likely to find. And I think some of my favorite scenes in the episode comes when she discusses training Baby Yoda, now officially named Grogu, with Mando. She refuses to train the little guy since he's formed too many attachments. And it's here that the show makes a very clever connection. We're used to thinking of Grogu as the show's cute comic relief, kind of a living plush toy, but she sees something much darker, another potential Anakin Skywalker. And if you've seen the Clone Wars, or even her fight against Vader in Rebels, that hits really hard. Mando clearly cares about Grogu, and he always has since the moment he found him. But where Mando sees a child in need, Ahsoka sees a potentially powerful and dangerous weapon. That's not to say that she doesn't care for the kid, she clearly does. Just that she believes the best path for him is to abandon the Force and any connection to the Jedi altogether. Which honestly isn't something I'd thought of before, but is a pretty valid point. But considering this is a Star Wars show, something tells me that won't end up happening. I guess we should talk about the main conflict of the episode, which was honestly pretty basic, but really helped out by how well staged that battle was, and the interesting hints that it gives towards the future. The villain of the episode, Morgan Elsbeth, had what sounded like a really unique and interesting backstory. So much so that I assumed there was some comic book or novel about her that I just hadn't read. According to Wikipedia, there isn't, which is a bit disappointing if the character is actually dead. It's like they created this compelling backstory for a character that got maybe 8 minutes total of screen time. The same goes for her lieutenant, Lang. His character wasn't quite as sketched out, but he made up for it by being played by 80s action legend Michael Biehn. And really, this character was here for one purpose: to give Mando a great face-off scene while Ahsoka was battling against Morgan. It was a small part, but the actor made the most of it, giving us a duel that was very clearly meant to call to mind his role in the 1993 western Tombstone. Things wrapped up in pretty typical Mando fashion. They saved the villagers and got rid of the Empire's rule over the town. But it's what Ahsoka is looking for that really has me interested: Grand Admiral Thrawn. Now, honestly, I've never been like a diehard Star Wars EU person, but I've loved Thrawn in particular since I read his first appearance in Heir to the Empire. He feels very unique in the Star Wars universe, a villain of cold, calculating logic in a fictional universe filled with mysticism. Honestly, I've always been a bit more of a Star Trek guy than a Star Wars one, and Thrawn is interesting because he feels like he was plucked out of Trek and set down in George Lucas's creation instead. I honestly can't wait to see Ahsoka hunt him down and what he has in store for her. Honestly, a whole show that's like a cat and mouse game against the two of them could be incredible, but I would love to see him show up in The Mandalorian first. Whether he's played by a big name star like Michael Fassbender or a character actor like Lars Mikkelsen who played him so well on Rebels, I just can't wait to see it. Overall, the Jedi saw The Mandalorian do what the show does best: execute a relatively simple story with style and some great action set pieces, while also giving us a new version of a character that I know a lot of people have been waiting to see in live action. Ahsoka's scenes with Mando didn't disappoint, and it did a great job of teasing out what's to come for both characters, since it now looks like he'll be on the lookout for a different Jedi. I know Mace Windu is the rumor, but I could honestly see them going a lot of different directions with it. If you have any ideas of who you'd like to see cross paths with them, I'd love to read them in the comments.
We're about to become a lot thinner.
You know, I've always enjoyed this show, but I think we might look back at this episode as a turning point in a few years, as the episode where it began to grow into a launching pad for creating a wider live-action Star Wars TV universe. It was great seeing Ahsoka, but something tells me that's just the beginning. I liked this episode a lot, and I hope you felt the same way about this video. But if you would rather watch an ad-free version, you can do that on Nebula, my streaming service that I upload to every week. Sometimes it's good to create stuff outside the constraints of the algorithm, and that's what Nebula excels at. I have 2 exclusive videos on the service covering the title sequences of Cheers and Rick and Morty in the Working Title series, but I'm far from alone. H Bomber Guy has covered True Detective, Nando V Movies has covered One Punch Man, and that's just a taste of what Nebula has to offer. But you'll also be getting Curiosity Stream in the same bundle, meaning you get a massive selection of documentaries about subjects like science, history, tech, and a lot more, alongside everything that Nebula already offers. Like this weekend, I watched Iceman, an absolutely insane documentary about Antarctic exploration. You can get all of this for $14.79. That's not for a month, that's for an entire year. So get the deal by going to curiositystream.com/captainmidnight. That's curiositystream.com/captainmidnight.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.